Good afternoon, and again, we want to welcome all of you to the Galesburg area today. My name is Eric Schultz. You might have figured that out. Thank you for your kind words. Mark, I appreciate it. I've been doing this for, I think, past 11 years to be exact, but it's been a great ride, and I regret to say that my new location in Pennsylvania, this may very well be my I didn't want you to hear that. But I thank you all because it's always been a pleasure to be out here, and everybody has been more than welcoming, and I've always had a great time. So, appreciate that. So, as Mark said, let's get this fuse lit. So what you're looking at is we're going to be doing a reenactment. One of the questions I always get asked is, what battle are we doing? To be honest, we're not going to actually demonstrate an actual battle. But what we are demonstrating is a lot of the small skirmishes that took place. There were about 1,700 different little battles that took place during the American Civil War. Many of them really didn't have any name, or if they did, it would be maybe something that one of the soldiers in the letter home would have written and used maybe a local stream or lake or village as the name of the battle. If you read Civil War, you'll find many of the battles had multiple names based on where that particular soldier was when they sent their letter home. For example, the Battle of Shiloh is also the Battle of Pittsburgh Landing. So that's an example of multiple names. Now, some of them, like the Battle of Gettysburg, was the Battle of Gettysburg. The Battle of Antietam is also called Sharpsburg. Manassas, also called Bull Run. So depending on who is writing and who is talking about it, they would alter their names. So a lot of the battles were just small skirmishes that took place over maybe an important railroad junction, maybe a bridge that was important, crossroads, anywhere across the country, because the battles were dictated by the terrain and mostly by the transportation system. Next week we're going to be at Galena, and that's a good example of the real major highway of the American Civil War were actually the river system and the railroad. So those were vitally important in holding a railroad junction, like the town of Galesburg, a very important rail center back in the day. So these were things that were important to the Army because of the movement of troops and the movement of supplies. Putting troops into the field, think of the difficulty of sending an army like General Grant's march down into Vicksburg. 60,000 men. You need to have 60,000 people fed every day. And you need to have them with uniforms, military equipment, ammunition. So they all have to have all of those things in order to be a functional army. And all of that has to get moved by boat, by train, and then by wagon. So roads, crossroads, trails, all of that became very important. So we consider artillery opening fire, and very typical of battles. A lot of battles can start with artillery. The artillery, of course, is to fire at range and to provide support for the infantry. Also for attacking, you're going to use your artillery to break up the enemy's position. And off to your far right, you will see Confederate infantry engaging. Now, if you look, what they are doing is they are skirmishing. Now, infantry was the primary branch in the Army. But 75% of the troops in the Army are going to be. As an infantry, they were trying to work as line infantry and as light infantry. So they were able to form a skirmish line, they're working as a skirmish line, moving and firing as a skirmish line, engaging the enemy. And what the Confederates are doing right now is called skirmishing and retreat. They're alternating their fire to try to keep as much firepower as the enemy, while at the same time alternating their movements backwards. So you get to see that movement, that use of terrain, and you'll see that the skirmishers are going to hide behind trees, they're going to utilize breaks in the terrain. And firing that way. Now you see the Federal infantry is marching forward in line of attack. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about was some of the great myths that have come up about the Civil War. And one of the things that I've always heard is that the infantry tactics were totally outdated by the time of the Civil War. The weaponry had advanced to such a great degree that the tactics of linear tactics, standing in file, companies standing shoulder to shoulder, this was obsolete. But the truth of the matter is it wasn't. The infantry is armed with a musket, rifled musket. It is a 3-round muzzle-loading weapon. Its rate of fire is 3 rounds a minute. So the formations we're going to see are dictated by mathematics. I know when you came here, you didn't think math would be involved. And I started reenacting it, it was involved. But it is. And here's the mathematics of this formation. The skirmish line covering about 100 yards in width is going to be covered by about 35 people. 3 rounds a minute by 35 people, and we're talking about 105 rounds a minute. That same skirmish line, that same 100 yards covered by an infantry battalion, shoulder to shoulder. That 100 yards, because it's 28 paces to a man, is going to be covered of 135. Do the math, 135 times. But that's actually not correct, because they're standing in 2 ranks, both ranks. So now we're talking 270 men. 270 times 3. So you want to be on the side that is sending 130 down range at the enemy, and being on the receiving end of 5 rounds per minute. Mathematics. Now we see coming onto the field mounted Federal cavalry. What they're doing is going out and harass that skirmish line. Totally for attacking the skirmish line, because you can ride them down, you can get on top of them, and there's not much they can do except run. So you can see them breaking apart the skirmish line, forcing them into either rest or falling back.
Oh, you see that squirrel jump out of the tree? And he jumped from about halfway up the tree.
The mounted cavalry is typically armed with a carbine. They can also armed with pistols. And you notice one thing they're not, baby, is they're not running around waving swords, because really simple. Who wants to bring a knife to a gunfight? So we see that the Federal cavalry has pushed the Confederate infantry back. The Confederate infantry is falling back towards its gun line. So now it's going to be supported by artillery. Cavalry plays an important role in the Civil War. One, it's mounted, it can move quickly from place to place. But cavalry is the eyes and ears of the army. The cavalry is out there determining where you're at. When you come to a crossroads, you don't know which direction to go. A fork in the road, you don't know where those two different roads are going to lead. Doesn't matter. They go out in front of the army, find the enemy, find your target, find what city you're moving to. So the cavalry provides you the services that you don't get with the Civil War version of Google Maps because they didn't have it. So knowing where you were at, knowing where you wanted to go, you didn't have an app for that because you didn't have an iPhone. Mounted troops are also important because your stopwatch is usually mounted because when you're in an engagement, that field could be several miles wide. And so in order for a general like Mr. Grant to know what's going on one end of the battlefield and another, he needs to send out couriers to assess what's happening. One of the things Grant was really good at was not conducting battles. He didn't. He would whittle. He let his commanders deal with the situation in front of him. Because let's look at it intelligently. He receives a report from a field commander, from a courier, 20, 30 minutes old, and if he's going to give orders to that commander, those orders will arrive to that field commander, and they will be 20 or 30 minutes old. A situation may be totally, radically different. So communication, what made Grant effective was he had good people. He trusted his field commanders. He trusted his subordinates to take charge and do what they needed to do. And had, as he worked through the army, picked the people he had faith in, that he knew would do what he needed to do. So he was a very good manager of people, or assessing people. Okay, now you see, it's called dismounted. What happens is, most of the cavalry fights on foot. They ride to the battle and then dismount. The reason being is that a man on a horseback is a pretty easy target. But at this time, they make themselves a smaller target, and it's also easier to load and fire a weapon on foot than it is on horseback. So they have the ability to do firepower. Now, the cavalry is armed with a short carbine. The carbine does not have the range of the infantry rifle. They compensate for that by the speed at which they can load and fire. A lot of the Federal cavalry is armed with either a sharp rifle, which is a breech-loading cartridge. There are several of the different models of rifles, or carbines, several different breech-loading carbines that are designed to use a metallic cartridge, such as the Burnside, the Maynard, and the ones have a Spencer repeating rifle. By the end of the Civil War, would be the most common Federal weapon for the cavalry, over 89,000 produced. So there was an evolution in the weaponry during the Civil War, especially impacting the cavalry branch. And this makes them very effective because they're going to be able to move up and lay down a lot more firepower and thus be able to address their enemy. We see the Confederates coming out of the wood line and surprising the Federals and pushing back their infantry. And as we look to our left, we can see that the Federal artillery is preparing to provide support as well. Now let's take a quick look at our Federal artillery. The gun closest to me, the one on the right of the artillery line, is a bronze 6-pounder. It's called a 6-pounder because it fires a 6-pound projectile. It is a smooth bore. It means the bore is smooth. That reduces the accuracy of the weapon. It's not as accurate, but it's easier to load and faster to load than a rifle. To the immediate left of the 6-pounder is a 3-inch ordnance rifle. Now the 3-inch ordnance rifle is a rifle cannon. And the rifling means that when the gun fires, the shell that comes out of that gun is steady accurate. So it's very accurate, and it also has a great deal more velocity, so it's much longer range. A 6-pounder will reach out to about 800 yards. 3-inch ordnance rifle will reach out to about 1,700. So the ordnance rifle is very important. On that ordnance rifle, if you look carefully, when you're sighting that gun, there's going to be a plumb bob which gets attached to the back of that gun. On the front of that gun, there's a small metal spike that is the front sight. The plumb bob is the rear sight. And the reason we have that, you may notice that this terrain is not perfectly level. So the plumb bob levels the sighting so that they can get a true straight line. Artillerymen will go back to the limber, depending on the type of gun that they're going to fire, depending on the type of shell or solid shot or canister that they are going to fire. They will go back. The gunner will designate what his ordnance is going to be for this shot. The powderman, limber master, exactly what ordnance is required, and will go forward with the shot. Then that shot, the number 2 man ram that bullet into the back of the gun and ready the piece to be fired. Inside that liquid chest, if they lift the lid, oh no, more mathematics. Remember taking trigonometry, you remember those tables of tangents and angles. Those are all printed on the back of the limber inside the limber chest. Because these guys, not only they need to be able to see where they're aiming at, but they need to be able to judge the distance and be able to take that information and adjust the elevation of the gun accordingly so that the shell will go the distance it needs. And because each shell is an explosive, there is a timed fuse on the front of that shell. So when it fires, the flames that come out of the gun will ignite the fuse on its way. You also, when you fire that shell, you want the fuse set so when the shell reaches the correct distance, it will explode over the head of the enemy. Now you may have been to some other Civil War reenactments, and a lot of times you'll see ground explosions in front of you. If you've been in any Civil War movies, a lot of times you'll see ground explosions. You'll see the stuntmen get thrown into the air with a shell explosion in front of them. That's actually not historically accurate. They didn't want the shell to bury itself in the ground. It's needed a battle. They've been living in the field. They haven't had a bath. The Army smells. They don't need to make them dirtier. They need to hurt them. So what they're going to do is they're going to explode that shell through the air over the enemy, not bury it into the ground and cover them with dirt. But you'll see that. It's dramatic. It looks cool. And if it looks cool, it gets on film. But that's the objective of firing an artillery shell. In addition to the artillery shell, is something called canister. Canister is a can. And just like if anything on a shotgun, the canister is designed to turn that 12-pound Napoleon or that 6-pounder into a giant shotgun. It's designed to fire a large amount of projectile into approaching infantry. If you've seen the movie Galesburg, very dramatic scenes when the Confederates are doing Pickett's charge when a long position, Swanson Medal of Honor winner, fires a canister into the Confederates and you just see a pink mist. That's how the canister is. It just disintegrates people. And artillery was one of the main killers in the American Civil War. Artillery was devastating. And yet it was the smallest branch in terms of the number of people. In addition to our 3-inch ordnance rifle, we also have a couple of mountain howitzers. These are smaller guns. They were designed to be easily transported. They're called mountain howitzers because they were designed to be used in mountains. They were designed to be used in terrain where you may not be able to take a full limber, horse-drawn limber, wide-wheeled artillery. They were designed to be able to take that gun apart, put the wheel and the case on a mule, put the gun barrel on a mule, put the limber ammunition on a mule, and be able to set it on a path. It's only one. And that way you're able to move that a lot quicker. Mounted troops, when they're facing a line of infantry, while they may have going to be an easy target. So a good volley of infantry fire into mounted cavalry is going to unsaddle a lot of horses and send them scurrying. Even dismounted cavalry blazing away with pistols. Pistols are extremely inaccurate at any kind of range. I went to a gun range with a pistol one time, set up 2 targets at 15 feet. That's 15 feet. Put game at the top target and had a bullseye right in the middle of the lower target. And 15 feet and it dropped about a foot. These are not highly accurate weapons, but they make a lot of noise and send a lot of lead flying at the enemy, so that makes them effective. So, one of the great myths of the Civil War, like I said, was the concept that the infantry, that the tactics of the American Civil War were totally inappropriate. That is a falsehood. If you do the numbers, you understand why they formed the way they did, why they fought in the linear tactics. It was the most effective way to deliver as much firepower as possible onto the enemy. So there were 3 main branches. There were some also specialty troops.
Misfire.
There were some engineers. Engineers, of course, would deal with obstacles. When the enemy goes and burns the bridge, it's up to the engineers to come in and rebuild it. If they have a river to cross, the engineers would create pontoon boats and lay a pontoon bridge across the river. In addition to engineers, there's also the Signal Corps. Signal Corps was used with two pieces of equipment. First of all, they had signal flags. So if you're in the federal camp and you see the Signal Corps, talk to them about their flags. Signal Corps was also responsible for the telegraphs. Now, when you're on the battlefield at Galesburg, Vicksburg, it's actually impossible to lay telegraph line between command posts. But you look at the telegraph going from headquarters maybe back to Washington. So a lot of times, Lincoln sitting in the War Department in Stanton reading the telegraphs would know more about what's going on the battlefield than maybe his field commander at that same battle, because he's getting that information in real time. You also have an interesting group called the United States Military Railroad. And one of the things that the United States Military Railroad did was extended the railroads so that they could extend the supply lines, building railroads. Grant's army at Vicksburg, besieging the Confederates, the U.S. Military Railroad built a railroad to provide him with supplies and materials. So the railroad becomes a very important tool, especially for the logistics of the Army and keeping the Army together.